Starting, all attendees are in listen-only mode.
So we're going to get going here in just a moment. I'm just giving everybody a few extra seconds to get logged in here, and we will get going. Okay, so we are going to go ahead and get going. So hi everybody, and thanks for joining us on another ConnectSMART webinar. We typically have a weekly webinar every Thursday, and we occasionally sneak another one in on Tuesdays when we have enough topics to cover. The topic of today's webinar is configuring our standard gadgets. That's the normal parameters that are part of our gadget catalog. We are going to be using our existing gadgets today in our demo. And just an FYI, I am Jen Coffey. I work on our Pro Services team. Some of you may have, I recognize a few names, and you may have worked with me before. We also do custom gadgets and things like that. So these are distinct from the custom gadgets we've worked on. So if you have custom gadgets that you received from the Pro Services team, some of these rules will not apply. But most of them will in terms of the gadget appearance and things. You just may not have some of the same parameters that we'll be discussing today. So without further ado, so today's agenda today is pretty straightforward. We're just going to run through the intro real quick. I'll take you through the docs site to show you where you can access this webinar recording and the associated content. We're going to focus on the web creator, the Gadget Creator first, which you guys would have just as part of your normal ConnectSMART install. And then we're going to move into the Developer Studio, which allows you to customize gadgets at a more granular level. And that is a local install. So if you have not installed that separately, do shoot an email over to support and we'll get you a serial number and get you up and running. And then we're going to just discuss a few additional considerations, things to keep in mind when you're configuring gadgets, and we'll run through the upcoming webinars at the end and take any questions you have as you have them. So I just like to touch on this in all the webinars. Basically everything that we do today, from the recording to the slideshow to any gadgets, attachments, downloads, scripts, tools, any references, they'll all be on a dedicated page for the webinar. And you'll be able to go there if you missed it or you'd like another member of your team to review the webinar. It will be up after today's call. And if you missed any of our other webinars, you will be able to find those recordings as well. So all our past webinars are recorded. And it looks like I goofed and left in a slide we do not need today because today is all demo, not really reviewing a slideshow. So I'm going to go ahead and exit out of here and show you how to go ahead and start configuring your gadgets. Let me just clean up some stuff I still have open, and I'll be right out of your way. Okay, so this is a page on the docs site that actually runs through everything we're going to cover today. So also, if you're into reading, don't want to rewatch the recording, you'll have basically a handy-dandy cheat sheet right here that's actually going to touch on everything we're going to do today. And I'm going to go ahead and take us down to the Gadget Creator. So this is the ConnectSMART Web Creator and Dashboard Viewer. So this is part of the normal install. So you just access this on the server by going to localhost/ConnectSMART, or if you have a dedicated URL that you guys have set up for it, you'd go there. And I have actually going to go ahead and get started with these from the dashboard since we're really focused on actually modifying the gadgets themselves and not so much selecting them. So here we go. All right, so I'm going to pop this into professional. It's just a little bit easier to see. It might not be your preferred color scheme, but it does make it a little bit easier to see through a remote session. So the first thing that we are going to cover is the query parameters that go along with each of the gadgets. So within the Gadget Creator, you can grab any normal I'll do one from ConnectWise as an example. So average resolution time, for example, we move that over to publish it. And when I say query parameters, I mean these like service boards, service category, locations, child tickets. All of these are basically going to modify the query that we're passing. So these are actually going to filter the data as opposed to change the aesthetic appeal of your gadget. So it has nothing to do with the colors or anything. These are all specific to the data that's going to be returned versus the color conditions, the additional parameters, and the top title and bottom title, which we'll address a little bit separately. These are available from the dashboard, so I'm actually going to show you how to modify them here. So in the dashboard, if you actually click on parameters, you will see that I will have my board name, service type, status, priority, everything available for me to go ahead and modify the selection that I have here. So I'm going to go ahead and switch this to our help desk. And there we go. So that has updated my thing here. And now the great thing about these top title and bottom title parameters is you can edit your gadgets on the fly. So in this case, this is going to be, it's my most neglected ticket, but let's say I want it to say something like update ASAP most neglected. So you'll see that pop up on the gadget here. Just give it a second. Oops, hang on, there we go. All right, so that goes and adds my titles and overrides the default titles that our gadgets come with. So we have default titles that they come out of the box with, and they will be overwritten by anything you pop into this top title or bottom title. Now let's say we had something like this where it's, and we want it to be empty. We can just go ahead and remove it. But if we've got one, let me see a good example of one that has a default. Okay, here we go. So this says all schedule items. And if we want this to be blank, we don't want a bottom title because we want everything just to have top titles. If you just add a space in there, it'll make that one disappear. So that's just one little trick you might want to be aware of, because just deleting it outright, it's going to revert back to whatever we have set as the default bottom title. So when you have one that has a bottom title that you don't want to see, just use that little trick to get it to disappear. One thing I did want to touch on, depending on the provider that you're choosing from and which platform our gadgets are looking at, you will sometimes see a parameter in here called color condition. We are actually eliminating that in the newer gadgets to be controlled by the alert targets that determine how the gadgets appear. So instead of setting a color condition here, which is, as you'll see, it's got, if it's 0, it'll be green. If it's less than 5, yellow, and so on. If you have a gadget that has this and you don't want this in place so that your alert targets can control everything, you're going to just want to swap this out with a 1 = 1. If you make it empty, that is not going to work. You are going to need to replace it with 1 = 1. But that'll go ahead and bypass the color conditions that we've put in place. So you'll see that on the ConnectWise on-prem gadgets. Most of the newer ones based on the CMDB will not have that in place, so you don't have to worry about it too much, but if you do see it, that is how you go ahead and eliminate it. Let's see, so I'm going to come back over here and go back to this guy, and let's share. So the gadget name, I'm just going to run through some of the parameters and the properties available in the Creator versus the more limited selection that we make available here at the dashboard. The dashboard parameters are great for going and modifying one of our CAN dashboards, one of the ones that's available out of the box. This is an example of one of them based on the logged in user. So you can basically just take one that's already put together for you and go ahead and personalize it a little bit, and you'll be all set. And like I said, this is basically the list that we're following along. So if you need additional aids or you have any questions, by all means, raise your hand. I will take them as we go. Let's see. So back to published, or sorry, I've got it right here. So you'll see that we'll have all these parameters. If there are a lot of parameters, they may not all appear under common, and you may need to go to show all to actually get a view of everything that's available. And you'll see these exclude ones going away as well. It used to be that you would actually use a separate exclude parameter, whereas now it's actually built in to our gadgets. So these will be disappearing. You won't see them cluttering up your parameter lists anymore. But same as we did from the dashboard, you can modify that top title, bottom title here. And under properties, this just corresponds to the file name of the gadget. So if we need to make this something more descriptive, like say this is average resolution time on the help desk, there we go. And here we go. So now if this was looking for, let's say this was a sum of one gross margin on opportunities, we would want that actually to be formatted as currency. So this is where you'd actually use the value format to go ahead and make those changes automatically for you. So whether you want a decimal place or none at all, you've got your options here. Actually, this seems to be a little bit buggy. I can't get the one with no, all right, looks like I have a bug in my on-prem gadget here, so I'll make sure that gets documented. You'll see another one though that looks kind of like this. It's got that hash or number sign and just shows that there's no decimal place. So if you want to get rid of the decimals, there will be an option here in the drop-down. I think this might just be a lonely bug here. The value padding is actually going to add some leading zeros here so that it'll format things. So if you take a look at, say, get rid of that to 0, it moved over a little bit, so now it's centered. And if we wanted this to be right aligned, and let's say everything was say we're lining it up with a couple of other gadgets that all have 4-digit values, you can go ahead and throw some value padding in there to get it in place where it's always going to line up right. This title is the real title. So this is the default title essentially. So anything I put in here is going to be overwritten by whatever I do here. So this one, if you're going to share it with team members or something, you might want to put a kind of a generic title in here, and they will be able to override it through the top title and bottom title to make it something a little more meaningful. And since a lot of times these titles are very descriptive and kind of just sort of very dry, and you might want to clean them up a little bit so that you're not cluttering up your dashboard with a bunch of things that say, you know, tickets, no agreements, open tickets only on the help, so just make it whatever's meaningful for you, and we make it easy to go ahead and swap that out. The category is a free-form text field, and you can type in anything you want, and if it doesn't exist already, you are going to have a new category created. And the description, this is a description. You'll see me when you hover over this gadget. And so this is going to be available when you hover over the gadget to see kind of a brief description of what it's looking for or just what this gadget is doing. And we've got our refresh rate here, which we typically don't recommend that you make them too short unless it's something that you desperately need real time. That's just to maintain or to minimize performance issues with ConnectWise where you're querying the database too many times. So just keep in mind that every time this refreshes, it is going to query the database. And something that's doing a simple ticket count, probably not that big of a deal. But if you're doing trending stuff for agreement finance things, those are a bit more, what's the word? A bit more intense maybe for the server. So you might want to dial those back since, agreement trending or agreement invoicing for the year probably isn't something that you need minute by minute updates on. So we'd recommend dialing that back to, once an hour, or if it's just a trending dashboard that is going to display prior month or prior quarter information, you can always have it just do it every 8 hours. So really it's just once a day, since you wouldn't expect a lot of historical data to be updated after the fact. So, right, so now the third tab available here within the Gadget Creator are the alerts. The alerts are what I was talking about when you look here at the dashboard and you see down here these alert targets. So we can tell the gadget to highlight or bring it to our attention, right? Either on the basis of changing the value color, changing the border color on the gadget, or changing the entire background of the gadget. So that whole face of the gadget will flip to yellow, red, orange, whatever we define in the alerts. And those alerts get defined over here. And let me switch this to the lighter one so you can actually see a little bit better. So we just go to add an alert. But I'm going to actually modify one of the ones we have out here on the dashboard. So let's do tickets last updated. So these are all in here. And tickets last updated, which I have apparently hidden from myself. We'll do not acknowledge since apparently I'm not finding it. Okay, so we've got not acknowledged, and this one has a value. So the value of the gadget, let's say in this case, if it's over 0 at all, so that'll be a numeric constant. That's where we're going to define that number. So if the gadget value has anything on it, we're going to want to go ahead and just call that a warning. And if we have way too many, we're going to escalate it a bit, make it a little angrier looking. Let's say if it's over 10, we can get it to go to orange. And if it's over, whoops. And if it's over 100, this is, mind you, I'm looking at a database that is not my typical production database, so I do not have 277 unacknowledged appointments. But we've got to have examples. All right, so if it's over 100, I'm going to expect the condition to change to bad, which is going to change whatever I've selected in my alert targets to red. So right now, I'm going to go ahead and leave it at that. That's just a visual alert. And let's go ahead and refresh. And we're going to expect this guy. There we go. So the border has now changed to red, which is pretty subtle, not too bad. But let's say we want to see the background. That gets your attention very quickly. It's pretty obvious that this one needs attention right away. And something very subtle would be just to do, say, the value with no border even. And there we go. All right, so that actually just changes the value versus the border. And you can stack them, so you can do them all, but if you have the border, the value, and the background all the same color, obviously you can't see anything. So you're gonna have to pick which ones you like. So I'm gonna get the background removed. And that is how visual alerts work. And we also have audible alerts. So we will do a new one, and we're going to play let's do sad trombone. Whenever we are over, let's stick with 100 since we're well over. All right, so we've got a few sounds in here that you can choose from. I'm choosing sad trombone today. And I don't think you'll actually be able to hear it when it plays. Oh, okay, so I guess you did hear it. David's telling me that you can hear it, so it works. There's not much more to the alerts than that. Basically, you're just going to identify what those thresholds are for you of acceptable numbers, and you're going to build your alerts around that. If you find yourself doing the same alerts over and over again, it might be easier to build it out once in a gadget and then just copy and paste that info out of the PGF into each other. So if you've got a lot of criteria that you're putting in, you can definitely do that as well. I'm going to go ahead and save that. Okay, so we have touched on our query parameters, the special parameters, the title override, and the color conditions. We've gone through the properties and alerts in the Gadget Creator, and that's on gauges. And bear with me, I'm going to go ahead and pull up a chart, and we will go through a few additional features that are available to you in modifying charts. And that's going to be my tickets by status. Oh, I'm looking at the wrong data source for that one. Apologies. This guy is looking at the right place. Okay, so charts are going to have the same parameters that you would expect to see, just, board, service type, things like that, just like in the gauges. So there's nothing different there. But there are a few things that are a little bit different on the chart controls. So here, you can turn on where there is an auto scroll, which essentially just controls how the data is displayed. It'll allow you to scroll over in the dashboard itself. And the data grid is actually going to add a table underneath that shows you all of the various ones. And for example, there's that sad trombone again. So you'll find that the data grid is a bit difficult to see depending on how wide your chart is. So it's not the easiest in the world. And so you're going to have to play with these a bit when you're formatting your dashboard just to see what works the best. So I'm going to turn the auto scroll on. And actually, it does not seem to want to let me scoot over. Bear with me one moment. Okay. Actually, it looks like a few of them have an issue with the auto scrolling. You'll find that all the ConnectWise on-prem gadgets should be okay. I'm going to go ahead and turn off the data grid just because I find that it clutters things up. If I can't read the chart as is, I will probably change my chart rather than look at the table. If I want to see a table, I'd typically do a report, not a dashboard. But the gallery is where I would change my chart type. And there's that sad trombone again. I'm going to turn that off after we get out of this gadget because that's going to get annoying. But right now it is in what it's calling a Gantt. It's essentially just a horizontal bar chart. But if you wanted, you can turn that into a donut or a pie chart or even a scatter chart, which probably not the most useful one for this one, but just use whatever your heart desires. So I'm going to put that back to the Gantt just because it shows up better in the layout that I've got it in. The legend box you can toggle. So you're not going to see it here in my preview, but on my dashboard, we're going to see the data grid will disappear and my legend will now completely make the chart impossible to read. And that's because of the way it's laid out. So I will show you how that would actually affect it here. So you're going to always want to keep in mind that everything is highly dependent on how you're going to lay it out. So if you have all the space in the world, you can add all the components you'd like. If you're trying to cram a chart into a dashboard that's already full of gadgets and space is limited, you're definitely going to want to kind of minimize those additional features. So I'm going to go ahead and just remind you. So that's with the legend, and here is without the legend. So it's going to resize. It'll shrink everything down when it's adding all those extra components in. All right, so back to my open tickets by status. A few other options we can choose here. We can make it 3D. Ooh. Okay, you can toggle that back. I'm going to go ahead and just leave it 3D. I kind of like it 3D. If this gadget had multiple series, and by series I mean if, let's say, it showed a count of tickets by status and it showed, I don't know, something like, say, the actual hours entered on the tickets that are all sitting in those statuses, for example, which I don't know that would be a terribly useful chart, but each one would represent its own series. So the tickets by status so tickets essentially would be one series and you'd have another for hours. Here you would actually see them listed out and you would be able to make them visible or not. In this case, this is a simple chart, so it only has one series, so making it invisible means we don't have any data. But if we had multiple series, we'd be able to toggle which ones we wanted to display. So let's say you had multiple lines and you only really cared about 2 of those, you'd go ahead and just eliminate the others by making them invisible. Same thing with the titles here. And with the angles, you can technically go and start monkeying around with these, change them to whatever you think looks good. I leave that in your capable hands. I have been told that my aesthetic leaves something to be desired. And that you're not going to see a difference on in this chart. And here we can toggle how 3D we look, essentially. So that looks very good. So, see? And on and off, just like before. Ta-da! And we can turn off the shadows. We can make them more realistic shadows, or we can do that. Matches either way. Same thing with the categories, though. Just like on the gauges, you can add any category you want. You can make a new category and it'll appear. Let me actually show you. There we go. So this is that new category that I created when I was updating the average resolution time. It doesn't ask you if you want to create a new one, and it doesn't yell if you accidentally are a letter off. So if you have a slight typo, you are going to want to rename that category to get it under the original one you were aiming for. Okay. All right. So that concludes what we're going to do in the web creator, and I'm actually now going to take us to the developer studio, which I am opening right now. So the developer studio looks like this, and to get those gadgets that we're using, we are going to let's do a gauge first, and we'll do calendar items not acknowledged. Okay. So we have some other gauge types that you can use, and I'm going to show you what those are here. So we've got the radial gauge, the vertical gauge, the horizontal gauge. These two are kind of like thermometers. And then that digital panel, which is the one you're probably most familiar with, where it just has a value displayed on its face. You can preview inside the developer studio. So if you have made changes, you can go ahead and preview them to see them with real data. One thing to keep in mind, if you have a digital panel and you have titles on it and you convert it to one of these other types, you will lose the titles and you'll need to add them back if you switch back. It's just because these don't have titles by default and they need to be added. So what it's going to do is this is going to give you that sort of speedometer. And same thing, it's still going to show us that's still the 277. And here we could, if we want, go ahead and add a title to it. And I will tell it to put, and let me just show you what I did there. Sorry, I'm going a little fast. So in the advanced settings, you're going to have, there's some simple things like in the border here where you can actually change colors and whatnot. I recommend ignoring that unless you're planning to control all of the colors for everything in your dashboards. Otherwise, see what things are controlled by the motifs as is, and just go ahead and modify anything that's not getting formatted by whatever theme or style you've selected. So I tend to use thin and high contrast. So we will use that as our example. So here, can change the font of the numbers, and we can go ahead. I'm going to add the title. So titles live here. There are none currently, so there's nothing to drop down or expand to. But I will go ahead and add, this is a title. Make it black. I'm going to put it at the bottom center. Okay, so you see, all right, so that does not fit very well, so not a big deal. We will modify it. And instead of doing it that way, so here it gets blocked out by that dial. Okay, so sometimes we can, if we want to get very specific on where it is, we have those, we've got these built-in layout options, right? So that it'll just put it exactly where you tell it to, but that doesn't really work on the radial gauge. So I'm going to go ahead and say, let's move that down. Of course, I can never remember how far I want. There we go. So let's just bounce that down. Go a little farther. All right, so it's there, and I'm actually going to make it a little bit smaller just to fit a little better. So that's where you can control the font. You can change the color. Technically, we can make a nice little angle there, which may or may not be useful for you, but it is your option. I am going to put it back to normal. And make it bold, not bold. Normal text editing features. Okay. Same thing with the vertical gauge. Again, we're going to lose that title, so if you like those titles, I suggest you not flip through the gauge types too often after you've made them. But yes, so those are your different options there. And this, again, remember this is going to be controlled by the styles and the themes on the dashboard, so don't worry too much about what color it is or what it looks like inside the developer studio, since a lot of these things will be controlled in the dashboard. So I don't want you to waste your time trying to change these up and then realize that when you put it on your dashboard, the style and theme override all of your changes that you applied in the developer studio. So inside of the border is where you're going to see most of the other things that you would care about when modifying a gadget. So the glare gets overridden on the gauges, so you shouldn't see that on your dashboard. But if you're using the none style, like this one, this actually removes anything that the theme or the style are doing to it. So this is just what it would look like in the developer studio. So if we wanted to get really granular, we could go and change the font on everything, change the size, change the colors, and do that. So the different styles. Okay. So we've got a few here, and there should also be, all right, there we go. So you can even get some kind of crazy looking ones in here. But remember, a lot of these are not going to be available when you're using a style like that. So I think this is what, tickets not acknowledged? It is. So I'll show you what this looks like on the dashboard. I'll just save it. Back to the dashboard. All right, so I'm in none right now, but when I flip to thin, it does not care about that gadget style. It is going to force it to match the rest because that is by design. So if you want to have those gadgets that you've customized looking exactly as you've made them, you are going to need to use the none style, and you are going to need to configure each and every one of them individually. I do reference that here just to make sure that you're aware that you do have to touch every single one of them if you do that. So it's not a super simple switch from one of the built-in ones to none, but you know, you only have to update a few gadgets. It's not that bad. So I'm going to actually go ahead and open up one of our charts as well. And that was my open by status. Okay. So in the Developer Studio, we have a handy-dandy chart wizard where you can get really specific. So in the web-based creator, it did give you, like, say, a bar chart, right? But here is where you can actually decide, is it side by side? Is it stacked? Do we have cubes? And so there's just a few extras. Not a few, actually. There's basically a number of them available for each one. And it's not going to let you pick anything that doesn't match the data you've got. So you will see some where it says, nope, can't have that because you don't have the right kind of data. So cylinders, cones, you can get it to stack things. Yeah, so bubble, not an option. We would need to have another series. So pie, donuts, exploding pie charts. They sound much more exciting than they actually are. And so technically we can have a pyramid. Doesn't really work well in the tickets by status, but the sales funnel is one of these. Scatter is not going to work because we don't have the right data for it. Yeah, I'm pretty sure we are probably, nope, not completely done. Yeah, these are pretty limited. So these you'd use more for a custom type of chart. And if we had an additional column, another series, we could go ahead and use a combination, right, where there would be a bar chart along with a line. So you could even do that as, like, say, a trend line. So that is a lot of what you would do in here. Here, if we had others, this is where we could also add and remove additional series. This corresponds to where you're adding and removing series in the web creator. If you had multiple series, this is where you could actually split them out into like a separate pane at the top and the bottom. And we have some info here. So in configure axes and panes, so my x-axis here corresponds to ticket statuses. So if you want to add that additional title, I typically don't do that if the chart's pretty self-explanatory, just because this will scrunch up the main data on the chart. So if you add both the x-axis and y-axis titles, you are going to lose a little size of the actual data. And this is where you decide how you want those statuses to be displayed. They can be just horizontal along the bottom. They can be staggered. 90 degrees, typically not anyone's favorite since you can't read a lot of the words. And with ticket statuses, they're typically a lot longer than a lot of labels we use, so probably staggered makes the most sense in this scenario. We can add additional grid lines if you're so inclined. I'm going to switch that back to none. I don't need those. Can also format my numbers and text here, but these are just regular strings. So here we go. So the y-axis is count of open tickets. And if this was something that I wanted to have decimal places, I could. Or if I wanted to indicate that it was money, I can go ahead and just use one of these auto formats. In my case, I just want 0 decimal places, so I just want whole numbers. Oh, sad trombone. Yes, you might want to turn your alerts off when you're modifying your gadgets to save your sanity. And so same thing that we saw before with the show legend box. You've got that in here in the chart wizards. Here's where we can change a title. Tickets by status. Help desk only. You could just add on to the title that we have, or you could do a subheader. Do help desk only. And leave that one alone. And if you had additional info you wanted in your footer, this is the footer title. Okay, and you can also control the alignment of those titles as well. And point labels, you can turn them on or off. So if you are just comparing things against one another, maybe you don't necessarily care about cluttering up your chart with point labels. I find most folks want point labels. So if you want to make them larger than life so you can definitely see all the time, you can go ahead and do that. And remember, we're in none. All right, so I switched my chart to something that was more horizontal, which obviously doesn't look that great in this layout. So I'm just going to change my chart type back to there we go. There we go. So you see my titles have been added. You've got my X and Y axis. Titles have been added. And we've got our statuses staggered. Now, because mine is like this, I'm actually going to set it like that, since it should fit. There we go. Meh, I don't really like that either, so I will. There we go. Okay, so that is some of what you can do here with the charts in the Developer Studio. And you'll see on the Docs page, same thing that I was mentioning, where if you use none, these are the things that you can definitely do. You can modify like the font of titles and things like that, no problem. It'll let you get as ugly as you would like. Fortunately, there's no accounting for taste, so it did let me make this very ugly dashboard when I was doing this webinar before. But this just means that it is also very easy to customize for your specific needs. So you don't have to make a hideous dashboard like this. This is just an example. And what that same dashboard looks like when you flip it to none. So these are the kinds of things you can change on gadgets without having to revert to using the none style. So then you won't have to actually modify all the rest of these to keep them all consistent and pretty all the time. So certain things you can feel free to play with without worrying about losing it, and others this would require, if we were to flip that to none as is, this is what it would look like. So we'd have to go and update each individual one of these to clear the back color, make it transparent, get rid of the glare, add the glare, whatever we're trying to do there. Make the value padding and the size consistent across all of them, since these all come from various places and are either sizing automatically, some might have them hard-coded. Those are the things that we're overriding with the styles and themes. So that is, it's there for convenience, but if it's overriding things that you want to see, just that caveat that you want to keep in mind that you will have to update everything else on that same dashboard. So are there any questions or anything I can demonstrate for anybody who's interested? Everyone is on mute, but if you just raise your hand or type it into the chat window, I will unmute you and you can share your question with us. All right, well, I don't have any questions at this time, so if anybody thinks of anything After, by all means, just go ahead and shoot us an email at support@connectsmart.com. I'll have this video uploaded momentarily, and this will be on the dedicated gadget or the dedicated webinar page. And as I mentioned, the doc on how to configure a standard gadget with all your options is also already up on the doc site under training resources. So I look forward to working with you guys in the future if you have any questions on how to customize our gadgets. And if not, then good luck with making your gadgets and your dashboards customized for your teams and exactly what you want. I'm going to go ahead and sign off here. And just a reminder, we do have a webinar being, it's hosted by Gail Vaughn on Thursday, and it is on customizing our report templates. So if you have seen our new report templates that have been added, you can download these, add them to your tenant, and start running them. Gail's going to show you how you grab them and customize them and get going with them. So hope we see you there as well. And you would just register for that webinar by going to the docs site and register for an upcoming webinar. Just go right here and give us your info, and we will see you on Thursday. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and sign off here. So like I said, if you think of anything after we hang up here, just shoot it off to support@connectsmart.com and we'll get you squared away. You have a great afternoon, and we will talk to you guys on Thursday. Thank you. Bye-bye.